let's move on then to question 3. This was about managing that whole business of collecting and analysing data, which could be a huge industry.
Thanks very much. I think much of what we talked about in question 3 has actually been picked up in question 1, because I think it's quite a degree of overlap between the two. So I won't repeat the issues that have already been raised, but I think we did talk about insight of board members and linking that also to training in terms of were the clinical and non-clinical members of the board able to understand information that was being presented to them, able to understand the consequences of acting or not acting on that information. And then that went further into a discussion about culture and indeed the skill sets of individuals. We talked about generally within an organisation, if we try and make the capture of information an additional task for people to undertake without understanding either why it's important, or actually ideally trying to have a system whereby information falls out of the routine capture of information that's used for clinical purposes being the correct way forward, then that's where we should be aiming to head. The idea of giving busy clinical staff an extra form to fill in so the board can look at a particular indicator every now and then is not the appropriate direction of travel. We talked about, by and large, the collection of information being generally harder than the analysis of information, but also that there is information available in organisations that not all organisations make use of. And I think particularly there we talked about variation in the way in which complaints are used within organisations to either learn from, or indeed some organisations where potentially complaints are still seen as something that you have to mount a defence against. So somebody has said this about your organisation, so how do we go back and challenge that at one end of the spectrum, right the way through to some of the best practice we've heard in terms of patient voices, patient stories at the boards, inviting complaints along to give people to give their perspective of the care that was delivered. We had a discussion about, linking to Dave Ross's point from earlier on, about whether or not we needed more standardisation around what boards should be looking at, or if every board should be left to get on with it and every board should be considered to be able to manage their own organisation. I think that the view around the table was there needs to be a bit of both, and that we clearly already have a standardisation around some information that's collected, so for example the HES data that people are using, but we need to make sure that it's being used properly by everybody if it's going to be used for comparative purposes.
We heard earlier on, and I think you might have raised this even, about that in many NHS trusts the process of collecting data has evolved over many years, and starting from what clinicians thought to be useful and then adding layers of national requirements on top of it. Have we got to the situation yet where we should stop collecting certain things and there should be a kind of wholesale review to get rid of some data collections that's not going to be useful and inform practice?
There may well be others in the room that are better qualified to comment than I, looking directly in that direction. But I mean, that review is underway at the moment in terms of information that's captured. And I think it's always time to review the information that's captured, whether or not it's still relevant, because quite a large amount of data that's captured is not used for any particular purpose as it finds its way through the system, and some of that time being spent on information that's of direct relevance to the quality of care delivered to patients is where we should be heading.
Okay.
Yeah, just very briefly, there has been a fundamental review of data returns and is out to consultation at the moment around stopping certain things, but it does need to become an ongoing iterative process. In fact, there's a duty on us in the bill to have a continuous review of stuff to try and minimise burden.
Yeah, okay.
So what we do with Foundation Trust is all the data returns automatically expire after a year unless somebody makes a case to keep them. So.
That's rather nice. It's something that you could apply to the clutter in your house, couldn't you?